welcome to a new episode of Interpreting India. From geopolitical complexities to economic uncertainties, India faces critical challenges in its quest for a more prominent role on the world stage. This season, we at Carnegie India continue to bring voices from India and around the world to examine the role of technology, the economy, and international security in shaping India's future. The fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria has meant a significant turn in Syria's domestic and international politics and security situation. A vacuum has been created, which groups including the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or HTS are attempting to fill. But how did Syria get here? What does the present situation look like? Where do we go from here? And what are India's interests in Syria and the broader region? I'm Saheb Singh Chadha, research analyst in the Security Studies program at Carnegie India, and joining us today to discuss is a distinguished guest, Ambassador Gaddam Dharmendra. Ambassador Dharmendra is a non-resident senior fellow at Carnegie India. He joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1990 and served in various capacities in Indian missions across the world and at the Ministry of External Affairs. His overseas assignments include stints at Indian missions in Tehran, Dushanbe, Washington, D.C., and Dhaka. He also served as India's Consul General to Hong Kong and Macau, as High Commissioner to the Republic of Zambia, and as Ambassador to the Islamic Republic of Iran. At the MEA headquarters, he headed the Disarmament and International Security Affairs Division and later the Policy Planning and Research Division. He retired from the Indian Foreign Service in July 2024, having served as Dean of the Sushma Swaraj Institute of Foreign Service. Ambassador Dharmendra, welcome to Interpreting India. Pleasure to have you here, sir.
Thank you, Saheb. Pleasure to be here with you.
So we'll start right off. I want to start off with asking you about the impact of the Syrian civil war and the role it has played in getting us to this point where Syria is today.
Saheb, you will recall that the democracy movement started in the Arab world from Tunisia. It was called the Arab Spring. It spread across very rapidly, and it also engulfed Syria. During that civil war in Syria, the Syrian regime led by Bashar al-Assad pushed back very strongly against the uprising. And there were concerns in the region at that time about calls for Assad to resign and make way for the democratic movement. In fact, Syria was also suspended from the Arab League, if you remember. Then in 2015, with the support of Iran and Russia, Bashar al-Assad managed to hold on to power, suppress the uprising, but was left dealing with a country which was fragmented. And the civil war was more or less, frozen. So since 2015 to the present, we had a frozen conflict in Syria, a divided and fractured country. And now with the latest developments and the rapid advances by the movement led by Hayat HTS, we have a situation where we have an interim government now. So that's where we are at the present.
So you mentioned the al-Assad regime, and there were discontents against it, and there were uprisings. So could you perhaps shed light on what were actually the grievances with the regime and the discontents which forces such as the rebel groups would have particularly tapped into over the past few years?
Saheb, we have to take a step back to look at Syria. It is not a homogeneous country. It's Arab, but we have a large Sunni majority. Then we have other ethnic and religious minorities like the Kurds in the north. We have the Druze Christians in the south. And of course, we have the Alawi, from which the Assad family came. The country was basically had a history of military coups, and the Assad family more or less consolidated their position since the 70s. So for the last 50 years, we've had the Assad family ruling a minority from a minority ethnic group, the Alawis, ruling over the country. And fragmented across were basically the various groups vying for, a piece of the cake, so to speak, for economic, gains, political, military. There were various factions within the country, each vying for some kind of influence. At the same time, we have to keep in mind that in neighboring Iraq, there was uncertainty post 2003 that kind of came across into Syria, particularly with the rise of the ISIS through Mosul and into Raqqa and into Syria. So we had these various groups, but by and large, post 2015, particularly let's say post 2011, economic sanctions on the Assad regime took a heavy economic toll. And that led to, a series of developments, particularly, a fall in living standards, rising inflation. And basically, the country was really in a shambles, particularly the economy. And the sanctions had taken a very huge toll. And over a period of time, state institutions were severely weakened as power was consolidated around Assad. So we see there were structural weaknesses in the country, and these came to a head in the last couple of weeks.
Thank you. So now you mentioned that the Assad regime sort of held on to power, consolidated support. I want to bring in international actors here. We know that the Assad regime, it had support from outside powers, as did rebel groups. So I want to ask you now the recent developments, what's going to be the impact on regional players such as Iran, Turkey, and also extra-regional players such as Russia, China, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, the United States? Let us say, who are the sort of winners and losers of the recent developments, if that is too much of a binary to put on it?
Well, look, in a fragmented country, what basically happened was the northeast was controlled by the Syrian Democratic Forces, Kurdish dominated and backed by the US. To the northwest, we had Turkey, which had come in, which had supported the Syrian National Army, the SNA. And then we had the Assad regime controlling large parts of the country from Aleppo, Homs, all the way down to the Abu Kamal border crossing with Iraq. So this was basically how the country was. And Iran had, through its ambitious program of putting together a Shia crescent, had uninterrupted run all the way to Lebanon and was able to put in place extensive supply chains to back its militia, proxy militia, Hezbollah. In the northwest, on the Mediterranean coast, Russia had control over the Tartus port and the airbase at Latakia. So this was how the country was basically divided, and these were all the major players. So Turkey on one side, United States with a smaller footprint, and of course the Assad regime. Assad was basically how to put it. It was like a house of cards. Like I mentioned, it was structurally weak. Assad was obsessed with his own survival, and in that he lent very heavily on Russia and Iran. So fast forward to what happened in the last fortnight. The rapid advances made by the HTS, led by leader Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, or Ahmad al-Shara, as he's called. In fact, Shara is designated by the US as a terrorist in 2017, and he has a bounty of about 10 million on him. Now, HTS has, with its rapid advances, has moved into Damascus. Assad fled on the evening of 7th, 8th December. He's now taken asylum in Moscow. So we have a situation where all the neighbors, particularly Turkey to the north and Israel to the south. Given the Israeli occupation of the Golan Heights, they have a border with they have a de facto border with Syria. So we have these major players. The impact has been felt most immediately on Russia and Iran. This was building up over a period of time because over the last 1 year, particularly post October 7th, the developments in Gaza, Hamas triggered a series of events which have now seemed to be playing out in real time. The fact is, Russia's support for Assad weakened progressively given their preoccupations in Ukraine. Similarly, Iran's support for Assad weakened progressively, and this dynamic, the Iran-Assad dynamic, is much more complex. Over the last 1 year, Assad has been mending his relations with the Saudis, with the Emiratis. There were visits. He visited Saudi Arabia. There were exchanges going on. And he was basically brought back into the Arab League. So Assad's, position was progressively moving closer to the Gulf countries, particularly the Saudis and the Emiratis. And he had been taking steps to dilute his dependence on the Iranians. So that relationship was getting a little frayed. And now when he was under pressure from the HTS, neither the Russians nor the Iranians came to his help. Do keep in mind that post 2011, with the uprising with the civil war in Syria, the Iran-backed Hezbollah was a major factor in propping up Assad, and the Russian air cover, the devastating bombing they had done of vast parts of the country, were instrumental in Assad's survival. Now, with both of his main backers, Iran and Russia, preoccupied, the support for Assad had diminished. And that was what led to his sudden, fleeing the country. Now we are seeing all the major players are positioning themselves, and this is moving on in multiple dimensions. For instance, the Europeans have reached out to the new establishment in Damascus. The EU delegation is there. The French have reopened their embassy in Damascus. The UK has sent a delegation headed by Anne Snow. So basically, you see, the Europeans are making moves, obviously with the blessings of the Americans. The Gulf countries are on a wait-and-watch mode. Moscow has given asylum to Assad. Iranians are, again, after the quick visits by Arakchi prior to Assad's leaving the country, Foreign Minister Arakchi was there in Damascus, and then he went across to Ankara. Iran has been trying to shore up its position. So basically, we see multiple plays by multiple actors, all important actors. Europeans are making overtures towards Damascus so as to make sure that the transition process is smooth. There is protection for human rights, rights of women. So they want to make sure that the transition is well laid out. This will enable Europe to look at how stability in the future will enable Syrian refugees in Europe to return to Syria. So that's where they are. Russia is apparently in some discussions with the al-Shara regime in Damascus to continue to hold on to their naval port in Tartus and the airbase in Latakia. So that's where we are. Yesterday, the Qatari emir was in Turkey. and he had met Erdogan. It was a sudden visit. It was apparently unannounced. Turkey and Qatar are trying to see how they can position themselves in the transition which is now underway. Down in south, we have to keep in mind Israel has moved into parts of Syria. It has secured some territory. Defense Minister Israel Katz has said that this is temporary. They are going to watch developments in Syria carefully. Israel has also taken out, destroyed Syrian Air Force, their air defenses, some of their naval assets. So basically, Israel is trying to secure itself from any potential threat which may come from Syria. So this is the main state of play. But the important actors will definitely be Turkey. Qatar is also engaged there. Iran's Arakchi is in Cairo for the D8 meetings. He's likely to open discussions with Egypt to see how they can cooperate in seeing how the situation in Syria will be managed. So that's where we are right now.
Multiple players, multiple positions, multiple parlays as it comes across. So Syria is in transition, but there's one other player which I'd be grateful if you could sort of help us understand better, which is also in transition. It's the United States. Trump will be in the White House in January. How does this change things? How is the US under Biden, and will the US under Trump perhaps look at Syria and look to sort of secure its interests there? And what are its interests?
The US primary interest, as evident from the present Biden administration and even the previous Trump administration, has been to prevent the rise of ISIS again. ISIS is fragmented, but it's not over. So that is the biggest and immediate concern the Americans have. Hence they remain in Syria to the northeast, along with the SDF. Biden administration, obviously, everybody was taken by surprise with the rapid advances the HTS had made. Blinken has been touring the region. He's been trying to understand what exactly is happening, who's going to be doing what. But moving forward to the Trump administration, Trump has made some comments, again, pretty ambiguous so far. He's praised Erdogan of Turkey. But beyond that, I think we'll have to wait for his swearing in on 20th January. Hopefully between now and the swearing in, we may have better clarity on how al-Shara and the HTS wish to govern. We have a template on how they did in Idlib, which they were controlling up until they took Aleppo late November. We'll have to wait and see how other factions, how will the HTS relate to the Druze in the south? How will HTS relate to the SDF? There are tensions there because HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is de facto backed by Turkey. So they will uphold Turkey's interests. I think the situation right now is very fluid. We'll have to see how everybody's watching and observing and what exactly al-Shara's next steps will be. He's saying something, but actually his actions will be more important going forward. The major actors are all of them are awaiting a Trump administration. And Trump has, while praising Erdogan, talking up Turkey, we'll have to see how he will, what steps he will take. Some of the appointments he's made are very interesting. his national security advisor, his PR to the UN, foreign secretary of state. These are all interesting appointments, very markedly and strongly pro-Israel. How will all these actors, how will they coalesce, and what steps the next incoming administration will take? We have to keep in mind one thing. In his previous stint as president, Trump had made it clear that he would like U.S. troops to leave Syria. I think then he succumbed to pressure from the Pentagon and the state, and decided to back down from that position. So if he comes back, will he press forward again on a U.S. Troop withdrawal from Syria, which may in practice be difficult given the changed situation right now with so many factions, a fragmented country. How will the Trump administration, incoming Trump administration, deal with such a fluid situation in Syria? We'll have to wait and see.
So you mentioned that we will need to wait and see how perhaps the HTS will govern. But you'd mentioned they had sort of a template in areas in Syria that they previously controlled. Would you of course, they made pronouncements which on the surface seem that, they are open to sort of cooperation, collaboration, coordination. But as you said, actions will need to be watched. Can we sort of perhaps take a look at how the HTS has acted in the past, governed in the past, and draw some conclusions about how they will govern at present?
Well, we'll have to look at HTS's background. The Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is basically a rebranded Al-Qaeda in Syria. Abu Muhammad has dissociated himself from Al-Qaeda. He reinvented himself as leader of the HTS. But there are still concerns of how decisive has that cutting off ties with Al-Qaeda has been. We'll have to wait and see. But Abu Muhammad al-Shara has made al-Jolani has made all the right noises. How they governed in Idlib, what little we know, has been, it was very pragmatic. They tried to be conciliatory towards the minorities. There was some effective governance measures. There was law and order. But do keep in mind, Idlib is a very small province, given that now they have an whole country to deal with, and particularly a fragmented country. So how Abu Muhammad al-Shara and his al-Jolani and his cohort how will they deal with it? They have retained the Prime Minister of Syria to help them govern. They have made some right noises so far. They have engaged with the Europeans. They have received the French delegation, enabled them to reopen their embassy. The UK is there. Qatar and Turkey intelligence chiefs were in Damascus a week ago. So we have a very, very fluid situation. But also there are concerns about a revival of some kind of Islam, which is going to be much more puritanical. There are those concerns. Al-Jolani has tried to address them, but it's very, very early days. How they will govern so far has been aided by the fact that people have been celebrating the ouster of Assad. We have to keep that in mind. There's a lot of optimism, cautious optimism, but people are hopeful of the future. There's a lot of Turkey hopes that the Syrian refugees in Turkey, over 2 million or so, will return. We have had reports that some of the Syrians staying in Lebanon are coming across. So we have a situation where there is cautious optimism, there is quiet confidence going forward. But we'll have to wait and see, really. I keep saying this because that's how the situation is. It's very fluid. How HTS governed in Idlib, will that be a template for how they will now conduct themselves in Damascus? Again, we'll have to wait and see. We are just 2 weeks since this entire change, a sudden and very abrupt change, which has surprised a lot of onlookers, has taken place.
Right, sir. Cautious optimism, but we will have to wait and watch. So, as we observe this sort of influx situation, I want to turn to India and ask you what are India's interests in Syria and in the broader region, and what are sort of the positions that the Indian government has taken? How are they looking at it?
Oh, India, of course, we have already said that we hope there will be dialogue, peace, and reconciliation and reconstruction. I think going forward, that will be our priority. Do keep in mind that India's engagement with West Asia, in particular with the Gulf countries, has progressed rapidly in the last decade. Prime Minister Modi is due to visit Kuwait this weekend, and that will again enable him to have a discussion on the regional situation, to engage as interlocutors, see how they are looking at developments in their neighborhood. Obviously, it's well known. We have a large diaspora. We have rapidly growing economic engagement, particularly with the Saudis. But we're also watching how the reform efforts are underway in Saudi Arabia and Emirates. There is social modernization. There's moderation on religion. Going forward, there is a greater focus on economy, on energy. I think this is how the situation in the GCC countries is evolving. We also need to note that GCC and the Islamic Republic of Iran have taken great efforts, made strides in the last 1 year plus in improving their relations. Iran has a neighborhood first policy. They have put in place, they have reopened their embassies, exchanged ambassadors. There has been high level engagement going on. So New Delhi is watching these developments closely. We have a relationship with Iran, as we have relationship with the GCC, as we have relations with Israel. So typically, India will be seeking to balance its equities. We have a vested interest in peace and stability in the region, given that we have a diaspora of 35 million people there. So all of these taken together will be factored in very closely in New Delhi. I'm sure about that. But on the other issue of the Abraham Accords and the IMEC and the I2U2, going forward, we'll have to see how each of these vectors will play out, how each of these nodes, so to speak, will play out. The Saudi-Israel reconciliation or establishment of relations, whenever that takes place, will be hugely dependent on developments in the West Bank and Gaza. We have a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, a 60-day ceasefire. Quite probably developments in Syria will impact on that ceasefire and make it more permanent. My assessment is that ceasefire will endure more strongly. Efforts are also underway between being mediated in Egypt for a ceasefire in the Gaza. I think we'll have some news on that front soon. So I think taken together, we are seeing cautiously optimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic about stability in the region, but it depends entirely on how Syria plays out. I think that is going to be a crucial factor. But coming back to India and the GCC, India and the I2U2, I think we'll be looking at stability in Syria. It's in our interests. Obviously, it's also in the interests of the region. The IMEC will depend a lot on how stability in Syria and Iraq and Lebanon will play out. I think that's going to be crucial for success of the IMEC. We'll have to see how the incoming Trump administration, how they will seek to shape the region. I think we'll be watching these developments carefully. But overall, India is well positioned, given the relations we have with the GCC, with the Islamic Republic, obviously with Egypt and Israel. I think we are well positioned, but any instability there will affect some of our initiatives, some of the connectivity and supply chain issues we are invested in. We'll have to see how we'll be monitoring these developments carefully going forward.
So I have a slightly tangential question, perhaps. You mentioned a variety of actors that India engages with in the region: Israel, Iran, Syria, GCC countries. Does India's engagement with every actor sort of create tensions in its policies and amongst its partners?
Well, I think there is broad recognition of India's role as a bridge builder, as a balancer, as a just player. I think there is recognition of India's value proposition we bring to the table, where we do not see relationships as zero-sum game. Our relations with Iran are not necessarily at the cost of our relations with, let's say, the Emirates. We seek to balance both, given that we are well positioned both in the G20, in the BRICS, and in the SCO, where we have relations with multiple actors. I think that's very, very crucial. It's very important. And India has so far managed to balance each of its relationships. There are tensions. There will be tensions bilaterally. There will be tensions multilaterally, but equally, there will be payoffs. There will be benefits. I think on balance, the mutual recognition, say, between Abu Dhabi and New Delhi, between Tehran and New Delhi, Riyadh and New Delhi, I think on balance, there is a value proposition India brings to the table. And that is appreciated in all capitals, and we'll have to continue on that tangent, on that vector, whereby we seek to cultivate relations based on each engagement, not necessarily always mindful of if I engage Abu Dhabi, how will Tehran look at it? Not necessarily that kind of looking over your shoulder all the time, mindful of how others look at your various engagements. I think being able to balance each relationship on its own merits, moving forward bilaterally with each partner, I think we have done well so far. Especially if you remember last year's G20 summit in New Delhi, in the run-up to which we had a series of engagements with a range of countries which are not necessarily present in the G20, but whose voices we brought into these platforms, as we call it, the voice of the global South. Iran was a participant in a couple of meetings. Foreign Minister, late Amir Abdullahian, was invited to join in one of the engagements we did on the sidelines. I think by and large, that kind of flexibility and agility in navigating challenging relationships in a fairly complex and challenging region. I think we have done well. We'll have to continue on that path where we look at interests from New Delhi's perspective, factoring in the interests of our partner countries. Each partner has their own interests. It's how we look at the strength of those convergences and diminish and mitigate divergences. I think that has been a very successful aspect of our diplomatic engagements in the last decade or so. I would put it that way, very confidently.
So you spoke about India's role as, speaking to everyone, perhaps facilitating some connects. But that reminds me of something else you mentioned, which is sort of the Saudi-Iran normalization brokered by China, which brings me to the question, and I want to bring this back to Syria, which is, how is China seeing the situation in Syria? And, what are its interests there?
Oh, well, the HTS, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is made of multiple actors. There are various factions within the HTS also. Some of the fighters were Uyghurs from the East Turkestan Islamic Movement or Independent Movement, ETIM, ETIM, whatever you may call it. I think China will take note that ETIM factions or militia are part of the HTS. That should be of China will definitely be taking note of that and see how they will engage the regime in Damascus, enlist support of their partners, particularly in Turkey, and see how they can diminish ETM's role. So that will be one area China will be looking at carefully. But overall, China's economic engagement is very dominant. It kind of dominates all its engagements, particularly with the Saudis, the Emiratis, the GCC countries, including Egypt, Turkey, all the players. China has, particularly post October 7th incidents, has been a little more vocal in its support for Palestine. It's invited some of the Lebanese and Palestinian factions to Beijing. It has tried to see float possibilities of it being able to mediate or broker some kind of ceasefire or some kind of a political settlement, so to speak, in the region. Not necessarily successful, but at least China has made those intentions clear. But in doing so, it's been closely aligned with Russia. So China has been, some of the positions it's taken mirror those of Russia and vice versa. As regards the China-Saudi, the China-Iran relationship, it's got long-term strategic cooperation agreements with both countries. But having said that, the China-Saudi economic engagement is much, much heavier than the China-Iran economic engagement. And do keep in mind, when China engages with Iran, it will have to it does factor in, rather, the secondary sanctions by the US on Iran. So that will moderate some of China's efforts to deepen its engagement with Iran. And going forward, the incoming Trump administration, some of the positions they've taken, some of the appointments they've made will be factored in by China, particularly on the energy side. China has been the major buyer of Iranian energy, Iranian crude. I think they will be moderating those purchases given the Trump administration's announcement that, reports that the Trump administration on day one will pass some executive orders imposing further sanctions on Iranian entities. That may moderate or will temper some of China's economic decisions vis-a-vis Iran. Having said that, the Iran-Saudi, Iran-Emirati engagement relations have evolved from Trump's first term. I think the Trump administration will have to factor the changed dynamic in the region between all the major players. So going forward, will restoration of the maximum pressure on Iran, how effective will that be? Will the Saudis be able to navigate carefully the relations they have with the US? Potential re-engagement with Israel vis-a-vis Iran. And we also have to keep one thing in mind, Saheb, which is the changed dynamics within Iran itself in the last couple of weeks. Do keep in mind, Iran has faced a series of pretty devastating setbacks. The loss of its principal proxy in Hezbollah, the decimation of Hezbollah's leadership, the decapitation of their military capability, their assets, and Iran's own direct conflict with Israel, unprecedented. They had two engagements in what, about 4 months, and each time the Iranians have not really come out well. In fact, the second Israeli attacks on Iran in October seem to have, taken out the air defense systems, some of their missile production facilities, and some of their nuclear experimental laboratories. So I think Iran has suffered some devastating blows in the last couple of weeks. But having worked in Tehran, having worked closely with my Iranian colleagues, they are long-term players. They will recalculate, they will readjust, and they will recalibrate next steps in line with the evolving situation. The second point of Iran also is internal. There is been a succession dynamic which is in play. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is 85 years old. He is also carefully mapping out what the succession will be, and various factions within Iran are positioning themselves. We see the moderates are back, led by President Masoud Pezeshkian. We have Vice President Javad Zarif. We have Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. A lot of the old Rouhani team is back in play. These are moderates. They are pro-engage the West. They are willing to re-examine relations and look at how they can benefit the Iranian people, because the economy is under stress. There is high levels of unemployment, high levels of inflation. So there are some areas of concern within Iran, structural weaknesses vis-a-vis some of the setbacks they have faced in the last couple of weeks. I think on balance, we'll see Iran preparing for a next Trump administration, the second term. Their first term engagement has not been very very good, so to speak. So we'll see how Iran will play out in the second Trump administration.
Thank you, sir. So indeed, it's a complicated regional canvas with each country having its own sort of domestic trajectories. It's a complicated domestic canvas within Syria. But sir, to sort of sum up for our listeners, taken together, bit of crystal ball gazing, where does the situation in Syria go from here? And this will be my last question.
Difficult answer. For the simple reason that we are very early stages of transition from a 5-decade-old Assad regime, a brutal regime, highly repressive, which now we can see, we have insights of, actually it was a house of cards. We have an unknown actor in the Hayat Tahrir al-Shams. We have an unknown actor in the presence of Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. Al-Jolani actually means he hails from the Golan Heights, grew up in Damascus from a liberal family, but he has this background of being associated with Al-Qaeda, heading the Nusra Front, which as I mentioned, rebranded itself as the HTS. We have multiple actors. We have Turkey, we have Israel, we have Iran, of course, and we'll have to see how each one of them plays out. So, crystal ball gazing, my assessment would be, one, Europeans are back in play. They want to engage Damascus. It's in their vested interests, which any stability will enable them to help repatriate the millions of refugees in Europe, Syrian refugees. Ditto with Turkey. Stability in Syria will enable Turkey to send back Syrian refugees. So every country has got its own kind of interest. Israel wants to make sure that Syria does not become a launch pad for assaults on its security. We'll have to wait and see. Basically, I expect reconstruction of Syria, a revival of Syria's economy, stability of its society, multicultural society. These will be fundamental, in which we will have critical plays by the US, by Europe, of course, by Syria's immediate neighbors. And we'll have to see how the UN will play. Do keep in mind, in 2015, the UN passed a resolution 2254, which designated HTS as a terrorist organization. So there are multiple factors in play. But stability in Syria will enable stability in Lebanon, will prevent perhaps the supply of weapons and materials to the Hezbollah in Lebanon, which may temper Hezbollah's actions vis-a-vis Israel. We are already seeing signs of advanced discussions of a ceasefire in Gaza. So perhaps what's happened in the last couple of months will, like I said earlier, I'm cautiously optimistic. I hope in the new year, we'll see some stability in the region, which will benefit the people.
Thank you, Ambassador Dharmendra, for these insights into Syria's domestic, regional, and extra-regional situation, and India's interests, of course. Thank you very much for joining me on Interpreting India.
Thank you, Saheb, and thank you for having me. Thanks.
We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. To make sure you don't miss it, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts from. To learn more about our research and team, you can visit us at carnegieindia.org. You can also find us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you for listening, and a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all in advance. See you next time.